All right, everyone, welcome to this afternoon's session titled Mergers and Aggravations. The realities of merging and reshaping library collections. For this session, there are two of us live in this room, and we are joined by a colleague remotely, and she's going to kick things off right about now.
Great. Thank you. Everybody can hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. My name's Ann Krakow. I'm the library director at St. Joseph's University, and today I'm presenting with Denise O'Shea, interim dean of the library at Montclair State University, and Dan Holden, serials and electronic resources librarian at St. Joseph's University. First, let's talk about our respective universities, and I'll turn it over to Denise.
Great. Thank you, Ann. So Montclair State University is a large public Research 2 institution that is planning on becoming a Research 1 institution soon. We are located in northern New Jersey.
St. Joseph's University is a Jesuit Catholic university located in Philadelphia since 1851. It has several undergraduate and multiple minors. We are a smaller school with 7,000 FTE, whoops, I'm sorry, and about over 5,000 of that is our undergraduate population.
The mission behind the merger. Essentially, Montclair State University merged with Bloomfield College, which is a small private institution located very close to our campus. Montclair State University has undergone a lot of change in recent years. We have a brand new president who is very committed to serving the community and making sure that we support the community. So it's not just lip service, but real actual work. Bloomfield College was in financial distress, and its mission is the same mission that Montclair State University has, which is to offer affordable, quality education to an underserved population. So there was no way we were going to let our neighboring institution fail in this environment.
So for St. Joseph's University, we merged with the University of Sciences in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania College of Health Sciences in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Essentially, the goal behind these mergers was for St. Joseph's to kind of have a ready-made health sciences program. With U Sciences, we inherited occupational therapy, physical therapy, physician assistant, and pharmacy. And with PCHS, we inherited an accredited nursing program. And similar to Montclair State University, both U Sciences and PCHS were both financially unstable and looking to find a partner to continue.
So this slide shows the timeline of the merger. Essentially, in October of 2021, Bloomfield put out a call for a partner to help it avoid closing. Our institution responded almost immediately, and by December of 2021, we signed an agreement to explore a strategic relationship. A little less than a year later, both boards of trustees approved an agreement and a plan of merger. So up until that point, there were lots of rumors and bits of information sort of floating around. But once these agreements were signed, that's when the work really began in earnest for the library. By January of 2023, we started gathering information, visiting the other campus, introducing ourselves to the staff, and forming task forces. By July of 2023, Bloomfield College officially became part of Montclair State University. Now, because we were merging a public institution with a private institution, there was a lot of state involvement that you can probably imagine. And so really up until July 2023, we weren't even 100% certain that it was really going to happen.
For St. Joseph's University, the first merger was with the University of Sciences. There was an exploratory committee created in February 2021. Once they looked into it to see if it was feasible, in June 2021, that's when the merger agreement was announced. And then we had the year to merge with University of Sciences. With PCHS, it was announced in January 2023. and the merger date was January 2024. It was There was no exploratory session with PCHS, so it was just simply announced in January that we were merging. In both cases, St. Joseph's took over the name, so it's no longer the University of Sciences or PCHS. It's St. Joseph's at University City and St. Joseph's in Lancaster. I'm leaving out, again, kind of similar to what Denise said, a lot of those things, those accreditation things, and those hoops you've got to jump to at the administrative level that had to occur throughout the year.
So some initial misconceptions and then the very real reality that set in fairly quickly for us. Misconceptions, especially for the first merger that we encountered. So with St. Joseph's University as the surviving institution, we expected our mergers to reduce two separate entities, two institutions, into a single combined budget and a list of deduplicated subscriptions, the costs of which reflecting only the post-merger St. Joseph's, but with a larger FTE and a different mix of degree types. Such repricing would hopefully bring down costs while helping us continue all required subscriptions and maybe even expand into some new areas that we were faced with supporting. Ultimately, this was wishful thinking. In reality, it is nearly impossible to know exactly what you will inherit or what changes are going to impact your own resources in the meantime. The university itself might reprioritize funding to other projects post-merger and away from the library. We did not receive post-merger budget estimates for several months into the process, firm numbers only a few months prior to the close of the merger, and even faced budget cuts in the midst of merger negotiations. When negotiating new subscription costs, several vendors did allow for existing pricing with slight adjustments. However, many, especially around databases, used the opportunity to charge for more. Multi-site access fees, some pricing resets which eradicated grandfathered rates as we became a new customer post-merger, substantial one-time fees for previously purchased content, and suddenly discovered pricing errors that were corrected higher. Most impactful were combinations of existing account revenues, the so-called A plus B combinations that we had mentioned on the slide here. Regardless of whether that pricing truly matched the metrics of the post-merger institution or not. We were hopeful that our campus constituents would understand our need to reset priorities and expectations for resource acquisitions and even upend some existing norms as we went through the process. For example, having to move away from resources that provided direct textbook coverage, which was something that St. Joe's had not previously supported directly. However, there was considerable faculty and department pushback and concern as we had to cancel resources and reassess collection priorities. Structural changes also hit our librarians. So the librarians who came in from the University of the Sciences lost their faculty status and had to take on staff-only positions at the post-merger institution. Finally, we expected that the months of discussing all required changes to our accounts, access, invoicing, would seamlessly roll into place according to the discussed timeline. And these are discussions that were held with the vendors and the publishers. Despite assurances that all updates were ready to go, extensive testing and corrections were required with many publishers and platforms after our go-live date. Beyond the process of negotiating directly with the vendors and finding common price points and collection mixtures, some other external factors to be mindful of for our process and then for anybody who encounters this as well. Make sure to work directly with your IT departments at all times to ensure that you fit into each other's overall project timelines. While this is overwhelming from the library's perspective for the number of moving parts, that department is overwhelmed as well with all kinds of cross-campus developments. Or your IP addresses, proxy information, authentication systems, or email domains changing through the merger. If so, get the timeline established and communicate with vendors and publishers actively to mirror the changes in the platforms. Also, financial system changes. Just as our first merger closed, our university began a migration from Banner Finance to Workday. We were left to gather supplier W-9s and updated payment information with accounts payable staff updating the system while our first invoices went past due through no fault of our own. This can be incredibly aggravating and demoralizing after months of progress, but it's something to watch out for.
Thank you. I'll add that For the Montclair Bloomfield merger, we had very similar experiences to what Dan just described. We didn't know what our budget was going to be or whether or not we'd get any additional budget or staffing until the very end. So we had to consider the possibility that we might have to cut resources. Most of our vendors maintained the same agreements that we had and the same pricing, but there were a few that also looked at the merger as an opportunity to increase the pricing, which didn't always feel warranted to us. Montclair, I don't know if you noticed on the slide, had just under 23,000 FTE. Bloomfield was very small, only about 1,200 FTE. Some of the other things that we dealt with were more cultural. So the small institution, Bloomfield College, had been in a bad financial situation for a period of time, and you can imagine that the library lost out on staffing and budget over a period of time, to the point where essentially it was a one-person library. So the Bloomfield College library director was really doing it all, everything from reference to instruction to purchasing to cataloging, etc. So as we started forming task forces and project plans and trying to work our way through all the tasks related to the merger, we had to be very mindful of not overtaxing him. He wasn't completely on his own. He had a part-time support person, a few volunteers, and some student workers, but it was very lopsided staffing compared to the much larger institution that is Montclair. The other piece that came into play in terms of cultural differences is Montclair, as you can imagine, is a very large bureaucratic organization with well-defined processes for a lot of different workflows. So again, the staff at the smaller institution had to really adjust to that when they were used to sort of doing things their own way for a very long time.
If I could add to this slide, Montclair created a template for vendors to help kind of talk about the changes we did as well. We worked with general counsel to create some language to communicate with vendors what exactly we were looking for, the new numbers, the name changes. And Danny and Mizzy at Montclair put this template together. This is on the next slide here, so that you are consistent with all the vendors and also stating that and certain terms of agreement that need to happen in this transition process. Similarly, we had the same working groups that you're talking about. So we had groups working with IT, as Dan suggested. We had it all broken down to according to what we had to get done in the merger.
All right, so up until this point, a lot of what we've been talking about is around merging electronic resources and databases. Aside from that, we also needed to merge our physical collections, so the books and the media contained in the two libraries, and that involved merging our ILSs and rolling out a new catalog interface. Bloomfield College had a small open source library system, whereas Montclair State University has a large commercial hosted system. That part of the migration went pretty smoothly. Our commercial provider for our ILS assigned us an implementation manager who worked with us from the very beginning through the end. So some of the challenges that I think Dan hinted at with some of the work that he did with vendors, where there was this constant change in staffing, we had one person with us throughout the whole process. We had weekly meetings and updates. That's not to say that it was perfect. We still had to do a lot of testing and confirming of information. But some of the things that we discovered as we took on this project is that, again, in a small library where you have one person who's doing everything, cataloging really is not a priority. So it was more about, let's get these items into the catalog as quickly as possible so that people can start using them. But the standards that were used for cataloging were very different and really wouldn't cut it in the collaborative cataloging environment that we belong to. So it was a whole different way of thinking and managing items. The other thing that I'll point out is the smaller system really didn't have great reporting tools, so we didn't have a lot of good data to make data-informed decisions. So data around circulation, data related to patrons was pretty negligible. There had not been an inventory done in that library in a very long time. There had been some weeding, so we knew from the beginning that we couldn't necessarily trust the data that we brought over into the new system, and we are still doing some data cleanup today. Of course, we had to build in time for this entire project, right? We formed an implementation team on our side. We had a project plan, regular meetings, et cetera. And as part of that plan, that involved training the front desk staff to make sure that they knew how to provide all the different customer-facing activities that they needed to do at the front desk. So circulation, course reserves, patron account management. We decided to run both systems in parallel for a brief period of time. Because the rollout happened so quickly, the whole implementation went really fast. We could have rolled out the new ILS in the middle of the semester, but that timing really didn't make any sense. So we tried to be mindful of, what was a good time to do the rollout that would be least disruptive to our patrons. So the advantage of that was we had the system up and running to do the training and get people acclimated to it. We also had time to create some videos that we could embed in the website to teach our end users how to use the catalog as well.
We had almost the exact same experience at St. Joe's in both of the merger experiences. Just to emphasize that you don't know go back to that point we made earlier, you don't know what you're inheriting, and that goes for whatever data the school you're merging with, whatever they keep or don't keep, what the information they have. In our case, we had at U Sciences, they had books organized by National Library of Medicine. They had some books in Dewey. So there's a lot of cleanup even after you get to the migration point. And you have to include that in your implementation time, or at least include it in your timeline to make sure, because it does take a lot of time to help get on the same page.
Thanks, Anne. I'll wrap this section up by pointing out that despite all these challenges, there were some very clear advantages of merging these catalogs, and one of them is it allowed us to implement a new service of intercampus loans. So the small institution had holdings of about 25,000 print books, and our larger institution has about 600,000. And so now immediately we could start sending books back and forth between the two campuses and manage that all through the system. We also were able to implement standards for cataloging. A key thing I want to point out, though, that's not reflected on this slide, we may talk about it a bit later, is making sure that you're communicating all of these new benefits and features to the users. It's real easy when you're caught up in the guts of doing this implementation to be communicating internally, but don't forget about the external communication. Hey, we've got this wonderful new system, and now you can request all these materials. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about reshaping collections. Some of this we've kind of hinted at. This is basically a quick primer of things that you want to think about. So at the beginning, you're going to want to identify courses and programs that are going to be taught out, and hopefully you'll be able to cancel subscriptions in time to reflect that. The reality, though, is that we often did not receive information that we needed in time. So you may end up renewing things that later you realize you don't need to keep anymore. At the same time, you need to identify what are the new courses and programs that you should be providing resources for. It would be easy to assume that when you merge with another institution, they're bringing programs and resources with them. But the reality is that when you're merging with a school that's been in financial distress for a while, they may not actually have adequate resources for the programs that they have. So we had to do some analysis to see what are the new programs. In our case, one that stood out was there was an animation program that's actually quite nationally respected at Bloomfield College, but they really didn't have a lot of resources to support it. So we made a point to do that. And this kind of circles back to our president's mantra, which is we're not just rescuing this school, but we're really trying to do right by them. So it's not just lip service, but we're providing, real resources. Our electronic resources librarian spent a lot of time examining overlap. There were some resources that both schools had, but different types of packages. So making decisions around what to keep, what to not subscribe to any further. We found that belonging to various consortia and purchasing through consortia really helped. They worked with us and made that process very seamless. Again, as Anne mentioned, recognize that you may not have access to all the data that you need to make decisions around reshaping your collections. Once again, I'm going to make a plug for building in time to promote changes and new resources. Don't just do the work, but make sure that your patrons are aware that new resources are available. Reshaping the physical collection, I'll be completely honest, we have left that to the end. So that work is sort of just beginning. That's maybe one of the toughest things to do because we don't have a lot of good data. But it's exciting that we'll have an opportunity to hopefully enhance the physical collection at the smaller college, which is quite a bit dated at this point. And we don't know if the circulation there has been poor because they don't have what they need, or it's poor because people just are less interested in print. But time will tell.
Yeah, just to support what Denise is saying in this slide, you have to be flexible, and decisions that are made at the administrative level will disrupt whatever plans you might have. So you have to be very flexible and, again, communicate it out when appropriate, just so that you can keep everybody up to date on the changes that are occurring.
All right, so briefly I'll talk about the kinds of tools, excuse me, that we use to manage the merger. And these were the two key tools. So the university formed a university-wide task force for the merger and mandated that we use Smartsheet as our project management tool. This really helped the library in two key ways. One, it showed the rest of the university how much work and effort and how many resources the library was putting into this overall merger. Sometimes it's easy for others outside the library to not quite understand what the library does. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. So by exposing all of the work that we were doing, it made it very clear that this was a big deal, merging these two institutions, and these were all the resources involved. And these are the timelines that we were dealing with if they had questions around why hadn't certain things happen. The other nice piece about using the Smartsheet was it surfaced dependencies that the library had with other departments. So dependencies that Dan referred to before with IT, the library being ready to roll out databases, but maybe IT is not ready to update the authentication system. So by surfacing these dependencies, when we had our biweekly merger meetings, we were able to highlight those and sometimes come up with solutions in those meetings. So that was really helpful. We, of course, use Google Drive for document sharing and collaboration. A lot of the types of documents that we shared were mainly spreadsheets. Lots of information related to budgets, to inventories of resources. We had spreadsheets for testing access and updates to different systems.
St. Joe's, we also had Smartsheet. We didn't use it extensively at the library. I used it to communicate with IT and other departments about what we were working on with the mergers. But mostly we use Google Drive to communicate with each other, but also to document our progress. Similar to Denise, we had bi-weekly meetings for task, groups like an access services, collections, technology, and we use the spreadsheets to keep up to date on what we were doing, and to document it so we wouldn't lose track of all the changes. It's really important to do that, not just to check in with each other, but to have some sort of written record so you don't lose time and by misplacing some information.
Okay, so a few recommendations that came out of the overall process, and this goes back to vendor discussions and communications, and it's a suggestion that vendors, publishers, the intermediaries should set up focus teams that are assigned to institutions that are merging in order to cover both local, regional, all levels of sales reps, but also tech support, billing, invoicing, all other related departments. And if they're not doing this, it's something to pay special attention to on your own side if you're going through a similar situation. Connecting all the related departments prior to the close of negotiations removes surprises and gaps in action. It would help provide more effective continuity when sales reps leave for other employment as well, which happened to us on several occasions. 12-month process of working towards bringing all these collections together, identifying new costs, components, the exact steps that are needed. 2 months prior to close, that person leaves and it gets handed off to somebody else that isn't really aware of everything that was discussed previously and now doesn't understand the sort of the seriousness potentially of the deadlines that you're on. This is not the fault of those new sales reps by any means, but this is something that maybe internally could be handled just slightly differently because it does open a window for an improvement of approach. And if they're not doing that on the side of the vendors, stay in direct contact. Make sure that you're keeping all of your email chains, those threads of communication that you can point back to immediately and hand it off to somebody else and say, you really need to spend some time going back through 6 months of communications here. I can summarize it for you, but we have to get up to speed because I have a deadline for people to get access to this.
So the last bit of advice that I have is just really communicate, over-communicate, both within your internal teams in the library, with the larger institutional teams, with the staff of the other institution. But again, don't forget to communicate out to your users about the new resources, benefits, and wonderful new library services that emerge from this merger. We also took the opportunity to rebrand ourselves. We had been one library for so long, and we still struggle a little bit to remember to say university libraries, plural, and make sure we get the word out that we are a multi-campus setup now.
Today we're really talking about merging collections. There's many things you could talk about when you talk about these library mergers, but regardless of it, you have to accept the gray of the process. By that, I mean you have to allow for some ambiguity and uncertainty in the process and just kind of go with it. Otherwise, it will be very, very difficult. And just know that, like you mentioned earlier, you don't know what programs are going to be taught out. You don't know any FTE changes that might occur within the next few years, things like that. So just accept the fact that there are some things. I feel like I should, say the serenity prayer, but it's you have to kind of accept and kind of go with the flow and be flexible and kind of embed your plan with some flexibility because things don't always go the way you think they're going to go. And with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Thanks, Anne. So we do have a moderator here with the mic. If you could please introduce yourself and your organization.
Thanks, Constance Malpas, SALC Research. I want to thank you all for this panel. It's so instructive and so helpful to have you address not just how you did it, but offer recommendations to others who may be needing to prepare for this kind of situation. I'm curious to know, are you finding that there is an emerging community of practice? It's very helpful to have a panel presentation with perspectives of multiple institutions. And I'm just curious to know more about how did you find one another? How are you finding other institutions from whom both you were able to learn during the process, but also, kind of more importantly, how you can share that message out to other institutions that need to prepare for a process that, and I particularly appreciate the the positive framing that this is not a rescue operation. It's a reinvention. It's an opportunity to build strength, because it seems to me that's a very important part of recognizing that as our higher education infrastructure changes, we're trying to move it forward, not just patch things, right? So it seems to me very important that this kind of cooperative approach to sharing information about how to model success in these kinds of circumstances is so important.
Thank you, Constance, for your question and those comments. I think a couple of us will answer it, and maybe Anne, you want to kick it off, since you
Well,
I think can take the credit for kicking off this panel.
well, thank you, Denise. So when I started looking at stuff, I always like to do some research, like a good librarian, and I could find very little how to merging universities. Um, I just set forth with an idea of my goal was, if I can provide the same level of access and services, regardless of where the student is, that is my goal. And and so and you mentioned communication. We could spend a whole half day on on communication issues. We could, but communication is key, and also understanding that the organization that you're merging with, if they're in the financial instability, may not be in the right headspace to want to do this. They may not be willing. They may not, they may be having issues, and they're, so you have to be gentle and you have to be understanding. And I have to say, with both U Sciences and PCHS, we've really gone out of our way to make people part of the staff part of the merger process. They were in communication with us from the beginning when we could. And because we had some issues with, like, legal issues of, like, you can't do certain things yet with the merged organization. Um, and but going back to your original question, it was tough to kind of know what to do. That's where I was very thankful to Palsy and Jill Morris, to talk with them about their ideas and talking about getting some feedback. Um, Danny Ann Mizzi, the former dean of libraries at Montclair, the reason why we talked and knew each other is because we ran into each other at ACRL conference at a presentation about mergers. And now I'm happy to say, actually, if I could do an unofficial announcement, Dan and I are working towards creating a consultation group on university library mergers. So hopefully you'll hear from us soon about that. Um, but yeah, it's tough to find those people, but you've got to reach out to different experts in your area. As I said, with Palsy, I was very lucky, and also just going to conferences when you can to see what's going on. Dan, did you want to talk about your experiences at all?
Sure. So I think a lot of the outreach between institutions was pretty much back channel communications. They had heard that other institutions were going through a merger or had completed one, and they were facing one themselves, and so they reached out unofficially. I don't know if there's a hesitancy as well, in that each situation truly is unique. It doesn't seem like every merger follows the same path. The vendors will tell us, oh, well, we've done this a number of times already. We sort of have a playbook for it. You can't have a playbook if each situation is slightly different. You have a general guideline for it, but I think that might cause some hesitancy for people to reach out for assistance, even if it's just to gather ideas, see what worked, what didn't, and then piece together what might fit your situation. But for an institution that has gone through not just one, but two, we are open to help anybody who has questions or concerns if they're facing a similar situation, whether it's you're the acquirer or the acquiree, however it ends up going. But I think that's something that needs to be expressed a little bit more forcefully, perhaps, that there are other places that have gone through this, have faced the same problems, challenges, and might also have their own ready-made tools to make sure that you're on top of every step along the way. And that comes out of a lot of pain and suffering, in a sense, but it does help the process through each iteration.
If I could just add a little bit of levity, I remember when they announced the second merger with Pennsylvania College of Health Sciences, and I could have sworn I heard Dan screaming from his office. So I'm glad to have this challenge, but it is, it's a lot.
Yeah, there are rumors swirling around our campus about another impending merger as well. And I didn't scream, but yeah, we'll see. We'll be more prepared this time. Are there other questions? Because we do have a few more minutes, I think.